They thought I'd just bow my head and disappear. They thought a guy like me, Nathan Carter, a black ex-soldier turned finance specialist, didn't have what it takes to fight their dirty game. They were wrong. In the stuffy conference room of Nationwide's office on Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, I was dragged into a trap. Karen Mitchell, a colleague with a smile as fake as her promises, stood up in front of 100 people and pointed at me. Nathan manipulated the project's numbers. The room buzzed with whispers. The CEO, with eyes cold as ice, nodded in agreement. They didn't need proof. They didn't need the truth. One accusation was enough to threaten the 15 years I'd poured into this company. I looked down at the fountain pen my father left me, the one I always carry, and it was like he was whispering, "Don't shout, son. Let the truth speak." I didn't argue. I didn't lose my cool. I just nodded, gave a tight-lipped handshake, and walked out of that meeting. They thought I was done, that I'd slink away like so many others crushed by their system. They didn't know I'd memorized every detail, every glance, every lie. As I stepped out of the building, under the fading Columbus sun, I knew this wasn't the end. This was the start of a quiet revenge, where justice would be served, not with fists, but with a truth sharper than any blade. Have you ever been betrayed by the place you gave your all to? If you have, stick around, because I did something they never saw coming. I can still pinpoint the day it all came crashing down. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp Columbus fall day where the chill sneaks through the stone-paved streets of Broad Street. I was driving my beat-up Ford Escape, crossing the Scioto River Bridge, the water glinting under the early sun, reminding me of my childhood days when my dad taught me how to stay calm in a storm. "The truth is like a river, Nathan," he'd say. "It doesn't rush, but nothing stops it." Before he passed, Dad gave me his old Parker fountain pen, a gift from his days as a bookkeeper at a small Ohio shop. "Keep it close," he told me. "The truth always needs to be written down." That day, the pen was tucked in my jacket pocket, a reminder of who I am. I pulled into the Nationwide office on the 12th floor, where the smell of Keurig coffee mixed with the clatter of keyboards and small talk drifting from cubicles. I'd been here 15 years, clawing my way up from a low-level analyst to finance specialist. Not because I'm good at kissing up, I've never been that guy, but because I know how to work. Numbers don't lie, and I always believed that if you do things right, justice finds its way. But that day, I learned justice sometimes needs a push. The all-hands meeting was held in the big conference room, where sunlight streamed through windows onto polished wooden tables. Over 100 employees packed in, some scrolling phones, others whispering about the new $50 million project. I sat near the back, jotting notes on my laptop, the fountain pen resting beside me like an old friend. Karen Mitchell, the project manager, stood at the head of the table, her smile sharp as a knife. Karen and I never clicked. She was always trying to muscle into my projects, stealing credit or spreading rumors that I was too old school in my approach. I didn't pay it much mind. I wasn't here to play office politics. But that day, I realized Karen wasn't just competing. She was out to destroy me. When the CEO, Richard Hayes, walked in, the room went quiet. Hayes was the kind of guy who flaunted power. Armani suit, Rolex watch, and a voice that made you feel small. He started talking about the new project, but his eyes kept flicking toward me, like he was sizing me up. Then he stopped, looked straight at me. "Nathan," he said, his voice low like thunder. "We've got some issues with the project's numbers." Karen's reported some irregularities. My heart pounded, but I kept my face steady. Karen stood up, her voice cutting like glass. "I've reviewed Nathan's reports. There's clear evidence he manipulated figures to cover up financial gaps." The room exploded in silence. Eyes turned to me, skeptical, curious, some pitying. I felt the blood rush to my head, but it wasn't anger. It was the sting of betrayal, like the floor had dropped out from under me. I'd spent hundreds of hours on this project, checking every number, every email. I knew there were no mistakes, but Karen didn't need the truth. She needed a scapegoat, and I, a black guy in a room full of white faces, was the perfect target. Hayes looked at me, his gaze like a blade. "Nathan, got anything to say?" The room waited, expecting me to jump up, yell at Karen, or beg for mercy, but I didn't. I remembered Dad's words, "Don't let them see you lose control." I took a deep breath, met Hayes' eyes. "I didn't manipulate anything," I said, my voice even. "But if there's an issue, I'm happy to go over the numbers together." Karen smirked, like I'd just dug my own grave. Hayes nodded, but his eyes said he'd already picked her side. They didn't fire me on the spot. They didn't need to. Karen's accusation was enough to plant doubt. Colleagues started avoiding me in the halls. Whispers spread through the office. Did Nathan mess up? Didn't see that coming from him. Each word was a jab, but I didn't let them get to me. I went back to my cubicle, sat at my small desk, my hand gripping the fountain pen. I thought of Marissa, my wife, a sharp lawyer who always told me, if they play dirty, I'll help you play smart. I thought of my son, Ethan, only 14, who looks at me like I'm a hero. I couldn't let them tear down what I'd built. End of the day, Hayes called me into his office. He sat behind a massive oak desk, the window light casting harsh shadows on his face. Nathan, he said, we're launching an investigation, but let's be real, you should prepare. The company's moving in a new direction, and you might not fit anymore. His words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I looked at him, nodded. I hear you, I said, my voice cold as stone. But I'm not going anyway. Not today. I shook his hand, a firm, curt grip, and walked out. As I left the building, the late afternoon sun bathed Broad Street in gold. I stopped by the Scioto River, watching the water flow slow and steady. The fountain pen felt heavy in my pocket, like a promise. They thought I was done. They thought I'd give up, like so many others crushed by this system. But they didn't know me. They didn't know. I'd memorized every detail, every email, every number, every glance. And I knew deep down, this wasn't the end. This was where I started. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't lose myself. I'd let the truth speak. And when it did, Karen and Hayes would wish they'd never started this game. They thought I was done. They thought that quiet nod of mine in the conference room was the end of it. That I'd pack up my things, leave Nationwide, and let 15 years of dedication get shoved into a cardboard box. Karen Mitchell was probably smirking in her corner office, with her shiny nameplate and smug eyes. Richard Hayes, the big shot in his pricey suit, likely forgot about me the second I walked out his door. But they didn't know I'm not the kind of guy who runs. Not after what I've been through, from my days in the Army, where I learned to stay cool under fire, to the late nights poring over numbers in my cramped cubicle. I didn't yell. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I just held my dad's fountain pen in my hand and started planning. And my plan was going to make them wish they'd never picked me as their scapegoat. The next day, I walked back into the office like nothing had happened. I wore a navy blue dress shirt, tie knotted tight, and stepped into the Broad Street building with a faint smile. Not the smile of a defeated man, but the smile of someone playing a long game. The office was the same as always, the Keurig coffee machine humming, fluorescent lights flickering on white walls, and the low buzz of chatter from the cubicles. But something was different. Eyes followed me as I passed by. A few colleagues nodded, hello, but their nods were stiff, like they were afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. I didn't blame them. In this system, doubt is a sharp knife. One cut's enough to ruin your reputation. I sat at my desk, fired up my laptop, and started the day like it was business as usual. But in my head, I was mapping it out. Karen had accused me of fudging the project numbers, but I knew those figures inside out. I'd checked them dozens of times, saved every email, every backup. If there was something off, it wasn't from me. And I'd bet my last dollar, Karen wasn't acting alone. Hayes, with that icy stare of his, wasn't the type to just sit back. They were hiding something, and I was going to find it. But I couldn't rush. My dad used to say, the truth is like the Scioto River. It moves slow, but it always gets where it's going. I'd let the truth lead the way. Step one was keeping up appearances. I didn't want Karen or Hayes to suspect I was pushing back. For the next few days, I worked like normal, showed up to meetings, answered emails, even cracked a few jokes with colleagues by the pantry. But every night, when the office was empty, I stayed late, sitting under the glow of my desk lamp, digging through project files. I reviewed financial reports, cross-checked numbers against budgets, and hunted for anything out of place. My dad's fountain pen sat on the desk, a silent partner. I took notes carefully, black ink flowing smoothly onto the page, like I was rewriting the story they thought was over. One Friday night, as Columbus glowed with neon lights and the hum of traffic on Broad Street, I found something odd. In an old report, there was an unexplained expense, $200,000, wired to an outside account, labeled consulting services. No contract, no invoice. I checked related emails and saw Karen's name in a thread with a company I'd never heard of. Even more interesting, Hayes was CC'd on it. I didn't jump to conclusions. This was just the first piece, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. I saved the email, printed a hard copy, and tucked it into my briefcase. They thought I wouldn't notice, I muttered to myself, but I always notice. I knew I needed help, and there was no one better than Marissa. My wife's a corporate finance lawyer with a mind like a steel trap, and a heart that doesn't back down. That night, at our modest house in the Columbus suburb, I laid it all out for her. Marissa sat in her armchair, a glass of red wine in hand, listening with eyes sharp as knives. When I mentioned the mystery payment, she raised an eyebrow. They're hiding something, she said, her voice low but certain. Karen's not smart enough to pull this off alone. Hayes is definitely in on it. I nodded, sliding her the printed email. Marissa scanned it, then looked at me. Nathan, how do you want to play this? Hard or smart? Smart, I said, my hand tightening around the fountain pen in my pocket. They want me to go quietly. I'll show them what quiet really means. Marissa smiled, that smile that told me she was ready to fight by my side. She started mapping out a legal strategy, figuring out how to push for an independent audit without tipping off Hayes or Karen. We need more evidence, she said. This email's a start, but it's not enough to take them down. I agreed. I'd keep digging, quietly, carefully, like a soldier on a mission. Over the next few weeks, the pressure ramped up. Karen got bolder. She sent company-wide emails hinting that the project was at risk due to certain individuals' irresponsibility. She didn't name me, but everyone knew. One morning, she even stopped by my cubicle, that fake smile plastered on her face. Nathan, you holding up okay? She asked, her voice dripping with honey. I hear the investigation's moving along. Hope you're not in too deep. I looked her dead in the eye, kept my voice steady. Thanks for the concern, Karen, I said. But I've always got things under control. She smirked, like she was daring me, then walked off. I gripped the fountain pen, the cool metal steadying me. Keep smiling, I thought. You'll see. Hayes didn't let up either. He started piling on pointless tasks, random reports, dead-end meetings, like he was reminding me I was under his thumb. Once he called me into his office and laid it out plain. Nathan, if you want to stay, you need to prove you're still worth keeping. Don't let this drag out. I nodded, my voice ice cold. Got it, boss. I'll do what needs doing. But in my head, I was thinking you're the one who should be worried. Every night, I drove across the Scioto Bridge, stopping at a little coffee shop on High Street where dim lights and the smell of roasted beans calmed my nerves. I'd sit there, reviewing notes, checking emails, and thinking of Dad. He used to say, the truth doesn't come easy, but it's always worth it. The fountain pen rested on the table, its black ink glinting under the light. I kept writing, line by line, piece by piece. I found 2 more suspicious payments, both tied to the same shadowy company. I sent them to Marissa, who started tracing the legal threads, reaching out to a contact at the state finance office for background checks. But I knew I needed an ally inside the company. I thought of Tom, a veteran data engineer, who always stayed neutral in office drama. Tom and I had worked together on a project years back, and I knew he hated lies. One lunch break, I took him to a deli on Broad Street. After some small talk, I got to the point. Tom, I said, keeping my voice low, I'm getting played. I need someone to help me dig into the system data, off the radar. Tom looked at me, chewing slowly, then nodded. I don't like how they're treating you, he said. Tell me what you need. I smiled, the first real smile in weeks. Another piece had fallen into place. Every move I made was deliberate, like a soldier setting traps on a battlefield. I didn't let emotion take over. Don't get me wrong, I was angry, furious even. But I knew anger would make me sloppy. Instead, I let the truth guide me. I kept the fountain pen close, writing my story, each line of ink a promise. Karen and Hayes thought they'd won. They thought I was just a pawn on their chessboard. But they didn't know I was moving, quietly, precisely, and when I was ready, the whole board would flip. 6 weeks after Karen Mitchell dragged me into her trap, everything exploded. Not in a loud, chaotic way, with shouting or fists. No, it was the kind of explosion that's quiet, sharp, like a blade slicing through the web of lies they'd spun. I'd been waiting for this moment, every second, every minute, from the late nights in the office to the hours spent by the Scioto River, my hand clutching my dad's fountain pen. They thought I'd given up. They thought Nathan Carter, the ex-soldier turned finance specialist, would slink away, leaving his reputation in tatters. But that day, in Nationwide's cavernous conference room, I let the truth speak, and when it spoke, none of them could run from it. It all started with another all-hands meeting, held on a chilly Wednesday morning in Columbus. The sky outside the windows was gray, as if the weather itself was holding its breath. The conference room buzzed with fluorescent light, polished wooden tables, reflecting the faces of over 100 employees. I sat in the middle row, my laptop in front of me, the fountain pen placed beside it like a talisman. Karen stood at the front, presenting project updates, her voice smooth as oil. She wore a sharp navy suit, that smug smile never leaving her lips. Richard Hayes sat nearby, hands clasped, his eyes scanning the room like a king on his throne. They didn't know that today, their throne was about to crumble. I was ready. Over the past weeks, with Marissa and Tom, I'd gathered enough evidence to flip the game. Suspicious emails, mystery payments, and a series of recordings Tom pulled from the internal system, all pointed to one truth. Karen and Hayes had embezzled millions from the project, funneling it to offshore accounts to cover their tracks. They'd pinned the blame on me, to deflect scrutiny, thinking a fraud accusation would stop anyone from asking questions, but they underestimated me. They forgot I always keep receipts. When Karen wrapped up her presentation, Hayes stood, his voice booming with authority. "We're nearing a critical milestone," he said. "But there are still issues to address. We need to ensure transparency." He emphasized transparency, and glanced my way, as if reminding the room I was the one under suspicion. That was my opening. I raised my hand, my voice steady but loud enough to carry. "I agree, Mr. Hayes," I said. "Transparency matters. I've got some information to share, if I may." The room went silent. Karen's brow furrowed, her smile stiffening. Hayes looked at me, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he nodded. "Go ahead, Nathan. Let's hear it." I stood, grabbing my laptop and a thick stack of documents, and walked to the front. The fountain pen stayed in my pocket, like a whisper from Dad. Let the truth speak. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to accuse. I just needed the numbers, the emails, and the truth. I started slow, my voice calm but razor sharp. Over the past few weeks, I've reviewed the project's financials. There are some irregularities I think the company deserves to know about. I opened my laptop, projecting an email from Karen, approving a $200,000 payment to a consulting firm that didn't exist. Murmurs rippled through the room. I kept going, showing two more similar payments, totaling over $1.5 million, all funneled to the same offshore account. "These transactions have no contracts, no invoices," I said, locking eyes with Karen. "But they have your signature, Karen." And Mr. Hayes was copied on the notifications. Karen shot to her feet, her voice shrill. "This is fabricated. Nathan's trying to deflect, because he's the one under investigation." But I didn't flinch. I pulled up a recording. Karen and Hayes' voices from an internal call, discussing how to shift the risk to Carter. The room froze. Karen's face went pale, her lips pressed tight. Hayes gripped his hands, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. The truth was crushing him. That's when Marissa walked in. My wife, in a sleek black suit, carried a stack of legal documents. She wasn't just my wife. She was a lawyer with 20 years of experience. And today, she was the storm Karen and Hayes hadn't seen coming. Marissa stood beside me, her voice cutting like a blade. "I've been working with the state finance office to review these transactions," she said. "What Nathan's shown isn't just irregular, it's evidence of embezzlement. We've requested an independent audit, and the board has been notified." The room erupted in whispers. Some colleagues stared at Karen in shock. Others shook their heads. Karen tried to push back, her voice trembling. "This is a setup. Nathan's out for revenge, because he's under scrutiny." But no one bought it anymore. The truth was too clear, too sharp. I looked at her, my voice low but firm. "Karen, I don't need revenge. I just let the numbers speak, and they've said enough." Hayes finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Nathan, you're going too far. We can handle this internally." But I shook my head, my eyes never leaving his. "Internally? Like how you plan to throw me under the bus to cover your mistakes?" I turned to the room, my voice steady, not loud, but heavy enough to make everyone listen. "I've given 15 years to this company. I'm not here to play politics, or sweep errors under the rug. I'm here for the truth, and the truth is all that matters." Marissa placed a hand on my shoulder, a small gesture that reminded me I wasn't alone. She continued, laying out the next legal steps: a formal investigation, potential prosecution, and a request for the board to review Hayes' position. One board member, Linda Harper, stood from the back of the room. "Thank you, Nathan," she said. "And thank you, Miss Carter. We'll take it from here." She looked at Hayes, her gaze icy. "Richard, I think you've got a lot of explaining to do." Karen slumped into her chair, her face ashen. She wasn't the smug woman who'd accused me 6 weeks ago. She was a shadow, crushed by the weight of the truth. Hayes tried to keep his composure, but I saw his hands shake as he stood and left the room, trailed by the skeptical eyes of the company. I didn't smile. I didn't clap. I just stood there, my hand brushing the fountain pen in my pocket, feeling like Dad was nodding from somewhere. "Good job, son," I imagined him saying. "Good job." As the meeting ended, a few colleagues approached, shaking my hand, muttering apologies for doubting me. I nodded but didn't say much. I didn't need apologies. I needed justice. And today, justice had won. But I knew this wasn't the end. Karen and Hayes would face consequences, and I'd make sure the truth kept shining. I left the conference room, stepping into the hallway, the window light warming my face. The fountain pen was still there, heavy, like a promise that I'd never stop fighting. The storm had passed, but the air in Nationwide's office still felt heavy, as if the entire building on Broad Street was holding its breath. After that fateful meeting, where I, Nathan Carter, laid bare the truth about Karen Mitchell and Richard Hayes, the company was turned upside down. There were no roaring applause, no loud celebrations like in some Hollywood flick. Just silence. The kind of silence that lets you feel the weight of justice, sharp and undeniable. I stood there, my hand brushing the Parker fountain pen in my pocket, feeling like my dad was nodding from somewhere. They'd tried to bury me, to turn 15 years of dedication into dust with one false accusation. But I stood tall, not with shouts or fists, but with the truth. And now, they had to pay the price. In the days following the meeting, the office became a maze of whispers, furtive glances, and stories traded over the Keurig coffee machine. Karen didn't show up anymore in her sharp navy suit, or with that smug smile that used to make my jaw clench. She was suspended by the board immediately, pending a formal investigation by Ohio's State Finance Office. I heard she'd tried calling a few board members, her voice trembling as she begged for a chance to explain, but no one picked up. One guy from HR said Karen cleared out her corner office late one night, not saying a word, her eyes hollow. Karen Mitchell, who thought she could crush me with a single lie, was now just a shadow, swallowed by the very deceit she'd woven. I didn't feel smug. Justice doesn't need gloating, and I wasn't here to dance on someone's downfall. Richard Hayes, the big shot in his Armani suit, didn't get away either. The board called an emergency meeting, and by the end of the week, he was asked to resign. Word spread around Columbus that Hayes was scrambling to hire a team of high-priced lawyers to fight the embezzlement charges, but Marissa, with her ice-cold smile, told me over dinner one night, "They can hire an army of lawyers, Nathan, but numbers don't lie. And the truth can't be bought." I saw Hayes one last time, as he walked out of the Nationwide building on a rainy afternoon. Gone was the kingly posture, the gaze that made people shrink. His head was bowed, his coat soaked, his umbrella a flimsy shield against the storm he'd brought on himself. I stood by the 12th floor window, twirling the fountain pen in my hand, and thought, this is what happens when you underestimate a man who keeps his promises to himself. A few days later, I was called into the boardroom. Linda Harper, the board member who'd spoken up at the meeting, sat at the head of the table, her eyes both stern and warm, like a mother ready to right a wrong. Flanking her were other board members, faces I'd only seen in company emails or on the internal newsletter. "Nathan," Harper said, her voice low but clear, "we owe you an apology. The company let you down, and we want to make this right." They formally cleared me of all charges. Karen had leveled, ensuring my record was wiped clean. More than that, they offered me the role of project finance director, a big step up, complete with a corner office overlooking the Scioto River, a higher salary, and control over the financials for the $50 million project. I sat there, listening, my fingers brushing the fountain pen in my pocket. Part of me wanted to say no, not because I didn't deserve it, but because I hadn't done all this for a promotion or a shiny nameplate. I did it because it was right, because I couldn't let people like Karen and Hayes keep manipulating and trampling others. But then I thought of Marissa, of Ethan, of the nights she sat with me plotting our moves, of the way my son looked at me like I was a hero. I thought of Dad, who taught me that justice isn't just about fixing wrongs, it's about building a better future. "I'll take the role," I said, my voice steady but firm, "and I'll do my best, like I always have." Harper smiled, a rare crack in the boardroom's stern facade. "We trust you, Nathan," she said, "and thank you for not giving up." I nodded, shaking hands with each board member, my grip solid but not showy. As I left the room, I felt their eyes on me, not the suspicion from 6 weeks ago, but respect. I didn't need them to clap or cheer. I just needed them to know the truth always wins, no matter how long it takes. Word spread like wildfire. By the end of the day, the whole office knew I'd been cleared and promoted. The furtive glances in the hallways vanished, replaced by genuine nods and congratulations. Tom, who'd helped me pull data, stopped by my cubicle one morning, holding 2 coffees from the shop on High Street. "You did it, Nathan," he said, his grin wide. "I knew you'd turn it around." I smiled, taking the coffee. "Couldn't have done it without you, Tom," I replied. He waved it off, but I saw his eyes light up, the look of a guy who knew he'd stood on the right side. Colleagues who'd once avoided me now sought me out. Some invited me to lunch at the deli on Broad Street, eager to hear the full story. A few apologized on my art white, like Sarah from accounting, who stammered,
Ethan, I got it wrong about you.
"Sorry for not speaking up." I nodded, my voice gentle. "It's okay, Sarah. I get it. I didn't hold grudges. I knew this system made people scared, made them stay quiet when justice was twisted. But today that silence was broken. That night, I came home with a bottle of Marissa's favorite red wine and a box of pastries from the bakery near our house. Our little home in the Columbus suburbs glowed with warm light, the smell of grilled steak wafting from the kitchen, and Ethan's laughter echoing from the living room. Marissa was in the kitchen, her apron smudged, but her smile brighter than any light. Ethan ran to hug me the second I walked in, his eyes sparkling. "Dad, you're a superhero, right?" he asked, voice buzzing with excitement. I laughed, ruffling his hair. "Nah, kid, just a guy doing what's right." Marissa caught my eye from the kitchen, her gaze saying everything: pride, love, and unspoken partnership. We sat around the dinner table, raising glasses of wine, apple juice for Ethan, and talked about ordinary
Saint's math test.
Marissa's new case, plans to fix up the backyard.
Ooh.
But inside, I knew everything had changed. I wasn't Nathan Carter, the guy under suspicion, the one they looked down on. I was Nathan Carter, the man who stood up, not with a shout, but with the truth. The fountain pen sat on the table beside me, glinting under the light, a reminder of Dad and the lessons he drilled into me. Do what's right, even if the world's against you. I'd done right, and that was the greatest reward. But justice didn't stop here. Karen and Hayes would face the law. Marissa made sure the state finance office wouldn't let a single detail slide. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it for the others, the ones crushed by the system, the ones without a Marissa, without a Tom, without a chance to fight back like I did. After dinner, as I washed dishes, staring out the window into Columbus's darkness, I thought of them. I thought of my army days, when I learned to fight not just for myself, but for the guys beside me. Justice doesn't always come, but today it came for me, and I'd do everything in my power to make sure it came for others. Somehow, someday, I stepped out to the backyard. The cool Columbus air wrapping around me. I pulled out the fountain pen, twirling it in my hand, feeling its weight. The Scioto River, though I couldn't see it from here, was out there in the dark, flowing slow but relentless, like the truth, like justice, like me. Night settled over Columbus, and I stood by the banks of the Scioto River, where the city's light shimmered on the water like stray stars. The autumn breeze was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and dry leaves, pulling me back to my childhood days when my dad would bring me here and teach me to listen to the river's flow. "The river never hurries, Nathan," he'd say, "but it always finds its way." The Parker fountain pen in my hand felt heavy, glinting under the moonlight, a reminder that I'd found my way too. 6 weeks ago, I was dragged into a trap, falsely accused and dismissed. But now, I stood here, not as a defeated man, but as one who'd let the truth speak. They called it revenge. I called it justice. I twirled the fountain pen in my fingers, feeling the etched lines on its body, the gift my dad left me before he passed. He was a simple man, a bookkeeper at a small shop, but he lived with integrity. "The truth is the one thing that never betrays you," he told me, and I carried that lesson through my years in the Army, where I learned to stay calm under pressure, and through 15 years at Nationwide, where I thought hard work was enough to earn respect. But Karen Mitchell and Richard Hayes taught me something else. Justice doesn't come on its own. It needs people willing to stand up, not with shouts, but with patience and truth. I'd done that, but as I stood here, watching the Scioto River flow slow and steady, I couldn't help but think of others, those who never get the chance to fight back like I did. I thought of my Army days, standing shoulder to shoulder with soldiers, fighting not just for myself but for the team. I thought of Marissa, who sat with me through long nights, plotting, analyzing every email, every number. I thought of Ethan, my son, his eyes sparkling when he called me a superhero. They were why I didn't quit, but they also reminded me that not everyone has a Marissa, a Tom, or a shot at turning the tables. How many others have been crushed by this system? How many have been falsely accused, pushed aside, just because they didn't have the right people behind them? That question weighed on me, heavy as the river pressing against the stones in its bed. I walked slowly along the riverbank, my shoes brushing the damp grass. The lights from the Scioto Bridge twinkled in the distance, and I remembered an evening years ago, when Dad brought me here after a long day's work. He handed me the fountain pen, his voice low but firm. "Keep this, Nathan, and never forget who you are." I'd carried it through every high and low, through my Army days, through late nights at Nationwide, and through the hell of the past 6 weeks, when I had to prove I wasn't the man, Karen and Hayes wanted the world to believe. The pen wasn't just an object. It was my dad. My promise to myself, do what's right, no matter the cost. I stopped, sitting on a wooden bench near the river, the moonlight casting a glow on the water like a mirror. I thought about what had happened since that fateful meeting. Karen and Hayes were history now, but the justice I'd fought for wasn't just for me. It was for the colleagues who'd stayed silent out of fear, for those the system had left behind. I'd made up my mind to do more. I'd help with the investigation against Karen and Hayes. But beyond that, I wanted to support others. Maybe mentor younger colleagues, the ones vulnerable to office politics. Maybe work with Marissa to provide legal aid for those wrongly accused. I didn't know exactly where the path would lead, but I knew I wouldn't stop. The river doesn't stop, and neither would I. I stood, my hand tightening around the fountain pen. Some might call my way old school. I just called it integrity. I looked at the Scioto River one last time, feeling like it was whispering to me, the way Dad used to. Justice had come for me, but it hadn't come for everyone. And as I walked away, the city lights glowing behind me, I made a promise to myself. I'd keep fighting, not just for me, but for those who hadn't yet had their chance to speak. Thank you all for listening to my story. If it made you think, even for a second, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. Justice isn't just a story, it's something we can build together. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you.